Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar entitled Energizing Malaysia's Future with Gas. And today we'll be speaking about many issues and covering over the next hour. We'll be looking at energy security, energy equity, environmental sustainability on a national level, but also on a global level. We'll be looking at the larger questions of energy as fueling our industry and our societies, especially the question of the transition from fossil fuels to renewables and the place of gas within this equation. Now, we're always excited to have your questions and comments. So please feel free at any point in time to put them in, post them to us in the chat function that's available on Zoom. So let's start the afternoon off with a quick introduction to our guests. You already saw their names. Rosman Hamza is the Secretary General of the Malaysia Gas Association. But before we begin, we get the kind of local national scenario, placed firmly in front of us for our consideration. We're going to turn to Professor Renato de Lima Oliveira. He's Assistant Professor of Business and Society at the Asia School of Business. And he's going to set the stage, the kind of global stage for the question of energy as well as the issues of transition. So Renato, please.
Thank you, Sharad. Thanks, Astro, for the invitation. I think this is an important topic to discuss, and I look forward to an interesting conversation today. Because Sharad and Rosman and everyone who's joining us today, we are living in unprecedented times, in very interesting times. Never before we had such an urge to basically have a fast energy transition. The world has been through different energy transitions, but they take time, and they have been driven by different technological changes. Now, we have seen a push towards transitioning out of fossil fuels, driven by availability of new technologies that can serve as a replacement, but also really push it due to the effects of burning fossil fuels they have on the planet. So we know that scientists and activists have been warning that for decades now, that burning fossil fuels generates greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases, they create this blanket effect in the planet. It leads to warming, and warming then leads to disruption of natural habitats and other effects, right? So we've heard a lot about that, but never before we have seen so much urge to change in terms of policy activity, in terms of commitments. So as we speak, more than 50 countries in the world, they have put in policy documents, and 16 of them in actually laws, the pledge to become net zero emitters of fossil fuel by 2050. We are talking about 30 years, right? 29 years or 28 years to achieve that goal. In terms of energy transition, that's actually quite a limited time. We need to go there. We know the direction, and we need to go fast. It means replacing basically almost everything that we have in today's infrastructure, the way that we generate energy, the way that we consume, in the way we spend in infrastructure, and so on. So for the youth that is joining this webinar, it's an interesting question. How do you see yourself working 30 years from now? Because you are going to likely join a company that will emphasize issues of sustainability much more than the previous generation, 1 or 2 generations. That was not core. That was something that people liked to talk. It was like kind of it feels good, but it was not core. Now it is core. The world is moving and committing to reduce greenhouse gases. We need to change our pattern of energy generation consumption. Over 80% of our energy currently comes from fossil fuels. That's coal, oil, and natural gas. and we need to radically change that. How are we going to do? It's not only going to be governments pushing for that. Firms, companies, large companies are also committing. One example from Malaysia is Petronas, who in November of 2020 committed to become net zero by 2050. But other multinationals operating in Malaysia and abroad, they are also coming up with these pledges. So we are living in unprecedented moments of change in the energy sector. To Malaysia and to other oil and gas rich countries, it raises a lot of questions. It raises a lot of issues, because these are countries that have based a lot of their fiscal revenues and job creation in a sector, in this more traditional energy sector, in the sector that we have today. So moving forward, how are you going to balance the need to diversify, the need to generate energy from other source, from renewable source with lower carbon footprint? How are you going to balance that with the potential fiscal losses, with the potential issue of not having enough resource to fund the rest of the government machinery, to provide the jobs? And actually, the oil and gas industry in Malaysia is one of the best paying sector, according to Department of Statistics Malaysia. So that's one question. You have to think about an energy transition from the point of view also of fiscal sustainability, from the job generation. We know that we know where we want to go to reduce fossil fuels emissions by 2050. There are different ways. You likely will still have, all predictions still point to some oil and gas extraction by that date, but then you have to offset it. You have to sequester that carbon, and we do not have cost-effective technologies yet. So that's another thing that we can also discuss today. But the big picture to me, when we talk about energizing Malaysia future, and if you ask with gas, I see that the world's moving towards energy mix. There's not a single source of energy that's going to replace what we have today, but rather we are going to have many different sources of energy. But what's going to be the role of gas? It's actually a good question. In the last World Energy Outlook from the International Energy Agency, the experts from IEA, they said that gas is the hardest to predict. It's the hardest source of energy to say if it's going to increase, if it's going to decrease. It's a very versatile, very flexible source of energy. It contributes to decarbonizing the world if you're replacing coal, but it doesn't totally get us there to net zero. That's a challenge. But I hope just to put up some more questions than answers right now, to steer up the debate and to emphasize that this is an important question, something that I do a lot of research about it and I also teach in the field.
Thank you, Renato. Lots of questions, and I know Rosman has a presentation for us, but maybe at some point you can also begin to respond to what Renato has put out. But Rosman Hamza, Secretary General of Malaysia Gas Association, the mic is with you now.
Thank you, Sharat. It is indeed an honor for me to be here. Let me flash my presentation. Okay. So first of all, thank you, Astro AWANI, for inviting MGA. Just like I said, it was an honor to share the stage with Professor Renato and also Sharat, whom I admire ever since he was started his career in radio, Sharat. Okay, so one thing that we need to basically take note is the comment, the statement from Dr. Renato. He says net zero. Okay, net zero is not equivalent to zero hydrocarbon. Okay, so I'm here today to explain to you why natural gas will still play a role in terms of bringing us into an orderly and pragmatic energy transition, and also that the gas will still be around as a core important fuel today, in 2050 and way beyond. Okay? So Malaysian Gas Association is a non-profit organization. We represent companies from the entire value chain, from upstream, midstream, all the way to downstream. So we are essentially the lead advocate for the Malaysian gas industry, where we promote the advancement of gas industry into a vibrant and a sustainable industry. Okay. First of all, let me explain what is natural gas used for. Okay. Do you know the tong gas in your house? Okay. The one that you use for cooking, okay, that's not natural gas. That's LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. Natural gas is the one that is being delivered through the pipeline and is being sent to the power plants, for example, to fuel the power plants to generate electricity. So we are basically here today being able to do this webinar with electricity generated from gas. It is also used for heating, and it's also used for producing important products such as rubber gloves and also plastic. You know, even the gadgets that we are using today is made from natural gas. So, Dr. Nato talks about energy transition. Talk about that we need to get there very fast. We need to basically try to accelerate the so-called energy transition. But we have to remember, because in developing policies relating to energy, what's important to the policymaker is to address the energy trilemma. Okay? The prosperity in today's world is not equally balanced because different regions will have different priorities. Okay? So while some regions racing towards net zero, trying to be the first one to be net zero kind of thing, there are still 759 million people who do not have access to electricity, and about 2.6 billion who do not have access to clean cooking. So to the countries in the developing region, balancing the energy trilemma is of utmost importance. So to explain energy trilemma, so to balance energy trilemma, we need to balance the three aspects that is shown in the triangle. First, you have energy security, where you are trying to ensure uninterruptible supply of energy. Secondly, about energy equity, where you have to ensure fair and affordable access energy to everyone. And thirdly, environmental sustainability, where you ensure prudent utilization of energy to safeguard the environment. Okay, so let me now explain to you how natural gas can support Malaysia in terms of balancing the energy trilemma. Energy security first. Okay. So Malaysia, we are fortunate because we are blessed with our own indigenous gas resources. In Peninsular Malaysia, for example, indigenous gas is piped directly from offshore fields into Kerteh and distributed throughout Peninsular Malaysia via an extensive pipeline. In addition to this, we can also bring gas from offshore, from joint development fields that we have with Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam, and put it into the Peninsular Malaysia. So the gas that is being delivered to the consumer is delivered via a pipeline system that is both extensive and very reliable. In fact, the reliability of the pipeline exceeds 99%. So the offshore gas supply is also supplemented by liquefied natural gas, or we call it LNG, which is brought into the peninsula through a regasification terminal, or we call RGT. You have one in Sungai Udang, Melaka, and the other one in Pengerang, Johor. So and then we talk about the gas market. So the gas market itself now is actually open to third party, where any suppliers who are now who are licensed by the Energy Commission can bring in LNG into Malaysia through the third party access and or the PPA mechanism, and sell directly to the consumer. So you have now more players, and then you basically enhance the energy security that way. The LNG itself can actually be sourced from more than 20 countries globally. So it's not one or two countries in the world that produces LNG. You have more than 20 countries that actually export LNG now. So in short, in terms of energy security, multiple sources and reliable infrastructure ensures energy security for the nation. Then we look into the energy equity. So with the extensive pipeline system, gas essentially enables energy access throughout Peninsular Malaysia, either directly being supplied directly to consumers or via the electricity that is generated by the gas turbine power plant. In Sabah, for example, majority of the electricity generated, I believe more than 60-70% is actually generated from natural gas. So especially in the 90s or into early 2000, the growth of the gas consumption rose in tandem with the rapid growth of GDP, which in turn brings a positive socio-economic impact to the country. So annually, the gas industry brings about 135 billion ringgit and more than 80,000 employment to the wider economy. Another thing is with the ongoing liberalization of the gas market is expected to be more efficient and more competitive, thus resulting in benefits towards the customer. Then we go into environmental sustainability, which is something that Dr. Renato speak what we call it in detail just now. So gas is essentially the cleanest burning fuel because it emits only half the CO2 or carbon dioxide compared to coal, and there is hardly any pollutant. So there is no particulate matter, there's no dust, no sulfur or salts that can cause acid rain or create a health issue. The latest gas turbine that you have in the market now can actually achieve efficiency exceeding 60%. In fact, the power plant that was commissioned in Johor last year was actually at that time the most efficient power plant in the world, which I believe have managed to achieve efficiency of 62%. Okay? So admittedly, Malaysia do have most efficient coal-fired plant in the world, ultra-critical power plant with efficiency, but the efficiency is still low. It's something like 42% kind of thing. So it's quite far from the 62% that gas turbine power plant can achieve. So in addition to be the cleanest, the flexible characteristic of the gas turbine makes it the perfect partner for renewable or RE because the flexibility and the rapid response enable the gas turbine to quickly react to intermittency of the renewable energy. So basically, it ensures that we have a stable grid, electricity grid. Okay? So Renato mentioned just now, there is a lot of commitment to go to net zero. So Malaysia has already committed as a country to achieve net zero as early as 2050. So this commitment, as announced by the Prime Minister last year, also includes to stop building any new coal-fired power plant. Okay? And because of this, Malaysia will need natural gas even more as fuel for power generation and also as partner to RE. According to a report by on Peninsular Malaysia Generation Development Plan 2020 by the Energy Corporation of Malaysia, Australia, Tenaga, a combined total of 21 gigawatt of new gas-fired power plant and renewable energy will be added into the peninsular grid capacity by 2039. So together with renewables, gas is expected to contribute towards reducing the power sector carbon intensity by 60% by 2039. Again, Dr. Renato talked a lot about energy transition and the need to accelerate. Unfortunately, energy transition cannot happen overnight. Okay? Any path towards net zero must be pragmatic because we need to fairly balance the energy trilemma. We should not leave anyone behind, and we have to ensure minimal environmental impact. So gas, ladies and gentlemen, is the best fuel to accelerate a pragmatic energy transition. Okay. I have a question for the audience. Okay, so from my argument just now, or my explanation just now, does natural gas has any role to play in the future energy, or will it slowly disappear and be replaced entirely by renewables? So there is a forecast by DNV that shows that natural gas is still important even in 2050 and beyond. Okay. So by the way, DNV is an independent expert in assurance and also risk management. They serve multiple industries. So essentially, we can say that their perspective is unbiased. As you can see on the chart on the left, natural gas, which is actually represented by the gray ribbon, forms a good percentage of the primary energy supply in 2050, including supplying to the power sector. Okay? So on the right is something that we extracted from a report by Boston Consulting Group, or BCG. This report was released in COP26, during COP26 last year, and is made in collaboration with the World Wildlife Fund, which is WWF. So the report explored the potential pathways that Malaysia can and should take in order to achieve net zero by 2050, but at the same time still addressing the energy trilemma. So for Peninsular Malaysia, as you can see from the chart, in 2050, BCG expect the electricity grid to still need gas, especially to support renewables. Okay, so in that year, year 2050, where Malaysia achieves net zero, gas turbine power plants is expected to form 39% of the installed capacity. So to answer my own questions that I posed earlier, yes, natural gas will play an important role in energizing Malaysia's future, even in 2050 and beyond. So with that, I hand back over the mic to Shurat.
Thank you so much, Rosman. And I again encourage the audience to pose their questions or comments in the chat function. Maybe I could begin with you, Rosman, and just sort of picking up on some of the assertions you made, because they're very interesting, including the kind of relative cleanliness of the cleanness of natural gas, because it is one. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not an expert. I just did some basic Googling of this. Is that well, natural gas is a fossil fuel, right? And that's something that's undeniable. But in its production, right? So in the extraction and production of natural gas, you have this problem around methane. So could you help us understand, I mean, where is methane in this mix? And we start to kind of interrogate the idea of sustainability and, you know, framed by the larger question, I mean, that Renato flagged from the very beginning, which is the climate crisis, right? Methane is extraordinarily damaging in terms of the climate crisis. So could you help us sort of figure this one out, please? Thank you.
Okay. So when we go into a net zero calculations, we also consider not just carbon dioxide, we also consider the greenhouse gases, other greenhouse gases. So net zero essentially covers the whole aspect of the greenhouse gas. Admittedly, as industry, we look seriously into reducing our what call it, the GHG emission, including methane. A lot of steps has been taken by members, including MGA members, to address this issue. COP26 last October also made a commitment to reduce methane by a certain percentage by 2030. So there are a lot of efforts being put in terms of trying to reduce the GHG footprint. So basically, there is no denial. There are concerns about methane, and you are right about the potency, even though it only lasts in the atmosphere for about, I think, about 12 years, and then it releases. But that is not an excuse not to mitigate the emission of methane.
Yeah, so Renato, if you could jump in here about a pragmatic path, because I think behind both your presentations was the idea that, you know, there are issues around economic growth and job, creation that cannot be put aside in making these decisions about how we transit to much more sustainable forms of energy. So could you help us understand, because you started by saying, you know, and asking really, what is a realistic time frame for the transition? We're using 2050 because those are kind of global commitments. We know what nation states are like when they make commitments. They're much easier to make than they are to actually deliver on. But tell us, from your kind of considered vantage point, what is a realistic time frame for the transition?
Great question, Shurat. It's a question that raises technical aspects. Can we technically today substitute the over 80% of fossil fuels that we have for renewables? And what would also be the impact in terms of extraction of minerals or rare earths, because solar panel, it generates electricity without greenhouse gases, but it takes electricity in its manufacturing, and it generates all the kinds of emissions along the value chain. Same with wind energy and so on. So there is a technical aspect of it. Then there is the economic aspect of it. What would be the cost of it? Is society able to afford all the new investment infrastructure in transitioning more from burning fuels to have more electrons, to electrify more of the world. So you have one technical question: is it possible to do it? Second is, what would be the cost of it? The third one would be the social question, which is whenever you have situations of transitions, you have what in social science we call distributive implications, which is it's going to generate some winners and losers, right? So in the case of energy transition, the losers are going to be the countries, the governments that they profit from today's reality, today's business as usual, typical the large energy exporters, the Middle East countries, Russia, Venezuela, even though Venezuela production went down, but countries that they sell traditional fossil fuels, or in the case of coal, a country like Australia, Indonesia, and others, they stand to lose. But one interesting characteristic of the emerging value chain of renewables is that it's very dispersed. You can have renewable energy generation in a country like Germany, even though you're not going to have the highest generation per square meter of solar intensity, but you do have a lot of value chain there. And the same as with Malaysia. So Malaysia actually stands to gain a lot from energy transition and generating jobs along the value chain for renewables. In the case of Malaysia, more related to solar. So not only all the EPCCs, the engineering procurement companies that are now investing into putting new solar farms, but also technicians, the manufacturing of solar panels. Malaysia is one of the most significant manufacturers in the world of that. So you do have these other gains as well, which should be taken into consideration. So the key thing there is, how can you decarbonize in a rate that doesn't put your fiscal stability into danger, at the same time that you build the skills of the future. You build the skills necessary to profit more from the source of energy that are going to gain more share in the total. And Rosman shared the BCG's WWF projections of what it would look like, and you would see that in the case of a energy mix of Malaysia, it would look like much more solar. Would have a very big share of solar. It would have a little bit more of gas, and gas is something that Malaysians and Malaysian companies knows how to extract it really well. You might still need to deal with methane emissions to make sure that during the extraction process and distribution, you don't have leakages. But it's something that the country knows how to do really well. It has built a very diversified and capable industry in that. But then the big question, are we going to transition to also have the necessary capabilities, necessary amount of companies that are going to conquer space here and abroad in other areas of energy? That could be hydrogen, could be solar, or could be even manufacturing for wind energy. So all of these are complex issues, but they require taking action today, because once you are building infrastructure for the next decades, it will stay there. It cannot be dismantled overnight, or otherwise you lose a lot of value in all those investments. And when you talk about education and preparing companies, preparing the workforce of the future, you also have to think about doing it today. So these are some of the challenges that policymakers, they need to start adapting now for the future that we want to be for the next 30 years.
Sure. Can I just continue from what Dr. Renato was saying? There's quite a few points here that I would like also to, I won't say rebut, just to continue discussion. I think we should have one lively discussion. Okay. So Dr. Renato mentioned that what you call it, you still need hydrocarbon, for example. Okay. If you look at the ASEAN Energy Outlook that was released last year, they have a few scenarios, and in all the scenarios, by 2040, what you call it, you still need about 70% to 80% of hydrocarbons in the energy mix. Okay, that is the projection by the ASEAN Energy Center. So when you have this kind of mix that you really need into the system, the best way is to look for the cleanest fossil fuel that you can. So you can't rely on dirtier fossil fuel. Why don't you switch to cleanest fossil fuel, for example? Because first of all, ASEAN has a very ambitious target for renewable energy, but still you need fossil fuel even in 2040. Okay. Then secondly, Dr. Nato talked about bring up Europe. So since he's talking about Europe, I would like to also bring up something about Europe. Last year we organized a webinar on gas and renewables. So we invited somebody who is based in London. And one of the issues that UK has at that time, around July or something like that, they have a wind drought. UK has about 24 gigawatt of wind installed capacity in the system. So normally they will get more than 10, 12 kind of thing. But during the wind drought, suddenly you have a huge drop of generation capacity. And unfortunately, you have gas in the system to basically come in and then rescue the system. So you can guess. In fact, somebody tweeted during COP26. During COP26, they have this restriction that you can only take a hot shower not every day because you have an energy crisis. And somebody tweeted that COP26 now is actually being electrified by gas. So it's quite an irony about that. Okay, and then we talk about the manufacture of the solar panels in Malaysia. We have the largest manufacturer of solar panels, for example. Okay, one of the largest plant or manufacturer solar panel in Malaysia is actually powered using electricity generated purely from natural gas. Okay, so again, you need natural gas in order for you to basically manufacture solar PV, that kind of thing. And then lastly, we talk about the large number of solar in the system. In BCG's report, in 2050, you have 39% of gas. I think you're about 44% of solar, for example. The reason why you need so much gas in the system in 2050 is basically it is not, at that time, it is expected there is still an intermittency issue with the solar. So that's why you still need gas. Kind of thing. I'm not sure whether there will be a time where you will have you can actually rely on 100% solar. Germany, for example, have the advantage, even though they have solar in the system, they have the advantage that they are interconnected in the European grid. So if they have issues with their solar, there's always a chance to import nuclear power from France, hydropower from Scandinavian countries, or even coal power from Poland. Okay, sure.
Okay, fascinating. There are actually 3 questions coming in, but I want to, before I take the questions on Shaifirul, Halim, and KC, is that looking at that projection into the future, Renato, because there's a question related to biomass or biogas here, but what I didn't see in the mix was hydro and big hydro, and I was wondering about that because Sarawak's entire future planning seems to be based on not just producing electricity from hydroelectric plants, but also exporting it. I mean, in terms of Malaysia's needs, why isn't big hydro in this mix? Renato?
Hydro is great most of the time. Hydro is great, but it's site specific. There's
Renato, coming from Brazil, probably will have more experience from what I call it hydro.
Yeah, so Brazil is it has one of the cleanest grid because most of the electricity comes from hydro. So you have one of the biggest hydroelectricity dams in the world is the Itaipu that was only surpassed when China built the Three Gorges. And my own family, part of my family had to move from their city because the city was inundated by water to build hydro back in the 70s to 80s. That is much harder to do nowadays in democratic countries. So it's easier for Brazil in a way to do it during the 60s to early 80s because it was a dictatorship. But in democratic countries, if you need to mobilize people out of place in order to build big dams, it's an issue. It creates a social resistance for good reasons, right? So it implies losing habitat and so on. It also generates greenhouse gases because once you inundate an area to create a reservoir, it generates greenhouse gases of the biomass that stays behind. So the idea that hydro is zero carbon, it's not exactly true. But it's still, there are different ways of building it, but it's still a renewable source, has a lot of benefits. But the issue when we look at power in the future, the issue with hydro becomes on the total capacity, the limit to scale of it, because Sarawak can increase and might be able to export while the local demand is not as high, but there is a limit to that, and that limit is not sufficient to power the whole Malaysia or power the rest of Southeast Asia and continuously export energy, say to Singapore. So even though hydro is, if you do have capacity, you tend to go for it. It tends to be a cheap source of electricity. It can suffer from droughts and then leading to variation. Different countries have faced that. Brazil certainly faced that as well. So you still need to have resiliency in the system and ability to have other dispatchable source of energy to compensate whenever you have drought seasons. But essentially, when we look to the future, why don't we have just more hydro? It's because there's not enough hydro capacity to supply.
Right.
Can I just add that it's not just okay. If you look at Peninsular Malaysia do not have so much of hydro potential. I think the last one is Nenggiri, where TMB just released I think a tender for consultancy or something like that. But the problem with Sarawak is the distance. Okay. One of the issue that electricity has is for you to transmit electricity, you need a transmission line, and to build a transmission line over a long distance will be challenging. For example, from what I call it Sarawak to Peninsular Malaysia, for example, even to supply from Sarawak to the new capital city of Indonesia, for example, will also be a great distance going through some what we call challenging terrain. To export from Sarawak to Sabah also will be what I call a challenging terrain. Okay, so this is where actually natural gas, back to natural gas, is the perfect energy if you want to transport over long distance, because we can convert it, we can compress the natural gas 600 times into LNG, liquefy it into LNG, and then transport it to long distance. Then you can have an regas terminal where what I call it, you build a power plant next to your regas terminal. Then basically you already have electricity, so we call it a gas to power kind of arrangement.
Rosman, you're doing a really good job selling gas here. Okay, I want to ask, there's a question, sorry, it's not my questions, a question from Casey, and just to you, Rosman, what are the barriers for power plants to switch from coal to natural gas? Some power producers are taking too long, as he says, in quotes, for the transition. Is it a cost and infrastructure issue for converting power plants from coal to natural gas?
Okay. Okay, I'm not sure whether I want to talk about globally, regionally, or what they call it, locally.
Just locally, I think, yeah. Maybe.
Let's do like locally. So we have about, I think, 12 or something gigawatt of coal-fired power system. I think the biggest challenge is the PPA. All these power plants have a PPA period. I think the shortest period of PPA that we have now is expire in 2029, if I believe Manjung. Is that, and then the thing is Jimah East, which was commissioned last year, have a 25-year period of PPA. So then you have an issue of what they call it, another 25 years until this expires. Okay? The other challenge that you have is the dispatch parity in Malaysia is based on cost of electricity. We do not factor environment into the dispatch factor, so it's cost of electricity. So whoever can deliver can deliver electricity the cheapest will get dispatched. And unfortunately, because of the economics of it, coal-fired power plant still offers a lower tariff, kind of thing. But if you factor in carbon costs, for example, you put in social economic impact costs, health issues costs, environmental pollution costs, then you will see that the cost of producing less cleaner fuel will actually exceeds what they call it, the other fuel.
Renato, if you could address the cost issue, because the way Rosman puts it, it's a very compelling argument. Like there are all these kind of external, what are the diseconomies or whatever it is the economists use to describe these downsides. But in terms of the end user, right? I mean, we have to see a time where consumers will just have to pay more for their electricity because it is being powered by renewables or cleaner sources like gas?
Not necessarily. Sharad, do you have any friends who are now using solar panels?
Unfortunately, no. I'm very ashamed to say them. I'm trying to rid them as friends, actually.
But it's now very common, even in Kuala Lumpur, to see the so-called rooftop solar being installed. And some of them installed by B2B, business to business, that you have different incentives for individuals, the final consumers, but also for companies to install solar panels, especially if you have like an operation like a warehouse, which is like a big roof that you can install with lots of scale solar panels. It's now one of the lowest costs of new energy generation in the world, renewables, particularly solar PV. Even if you don't take into account, even when you do not have the direct subsidies or large subsidies. If you're going to install new source of electricity, solar has been really, really competitive you see it throughout the world in auctions. Some people are going to say, oh, but there are different subsidies for renewables. Well, for fossil fuels, there are many, many subsidies. I think Malaysia was moving out of subsidizing gas to some industries, but that has been the practice for years. But it's the price of gasoline, but that's oil, but the price of gasoline is still subsidized, which means that whenever someone is filling a tank of gasoline in Malaysia, is benefiting from a subsidy that is going to support more generation of fossil fuels, of generation of greenhouse gases. So that's not desirable, right? We do have subsidies for traditional fuels. We do have subsidies in different ways for the renewable energy. However, if we have more transparency, and I think Rosman kind of alluded to that, if we have, for example, a carbon tax, you create an incentive throughout the system to benefit sources that are less carbon intensive. So when we switch on our electricity, the dispatch priority, basically you have many different source of generation, but who gets to generate first? It's the lowest cost one, and in the case of the grid of Malaysia, it will come from coal most of the time. But if you start to price that the environmental cost of that, you can change that dispatch priority. It might then change to gas, change to other sources if they it depends on the cost of carbon, how you're going to put a price on that. So that is one very transparent way, one way that economists tend to really like carbon taxes, because it provides efficiency in the system, that you can change that reality. So it is something that in the 12th Malaysia plan, and I've read it, it's now under study to perhaps adopt either different mechanisms, but basically to put a price on carbon, and that can have very positive effects throughout the energy system of the country.
Okay, Rosman, could you answer this question? It's from Anonymous, which I believe is not a surname or a given name. But okay, Anonymous asks, what are the low-hanging fruit solutions, in your view, for a suitable to decarbonize gas-fired power plants, which are perhaps the biggest carbon emitter among others? So this is a bit of a leading question, but
I think the surname is attendee, and then the first name is anonymous. Okay. The good thing about gas turbine power plant is there are always investment, because it's such a competitive market. Although there's only about 4 gas turbine manufacturers in the world, 3 large one and one in the other. You have another one based in Italy. They are always looking for ways to make the power plant more efficient, because as the more efficient that you are, the less fuel that you use, and then basically the client will purchase the most efficient. There are also opportunities for what we call carbon capture. That are something that is being looked at, and if you look at the even IEA, Dr. Renato mentioned just now, International Energy Agency projection, they are also looking into there will be a certain number of power plant in 2050. I think it's about 25 or 30%, which will be equipped with carbon capture and storage. Okay, but the thing is, in Malaysia, when we want to do carbon capture and storage, you need to design the power plant well in advance for you to fit the equipment later. So if you don't design it in advance, you will have issues later. One with how to do the technical interconnection, and secondly, you do not have basically space to put your scrubber, that kind of thing. So when we talk about low-hanging fruit, the investment in terms of gas turbine, for example, there is also a potential to upgrade existing gas turbine. So if your gas turbine is a few years old, there are also a potential to upgrade it to make it more efficient, kind of thing. And in the longer term, it's basically looking at carbon capture.
Okay, there's also a question from Roberto. I think this is for you, Rosman. How do you see distributed power generation for industrial production sites through CHP, combined heat and power plant, fueled by natural gas to reduce CO2 emissions?
So one of our initiatives is basically to promote the so-called CHP, or I think in here we call it a co-generation. So we have a dedicated task force looking into this. The task force has been around quite certain years. We organize things like we call it forum on generation, that kind of thing. We meet policymaker trying to remove barriers for co-generation. So at the moment, there are still certain barriers that makes investment in the co-generation not attractive enough. One of it is because the cost of electricity is still I won't say affordable. The cost of electricity is one of the issue that you have, because when you produce, basically when you talk about CHP, you have two ways to generate electricity and heat. You can buy electricity from utility, and then you can use maybe gas to fuel your boiler. So the concept of CHP is basically to use a gas turbine, put your gas into the gas turbine, and then the waste heat will be used for steam, and then the gas turbine itself generates electricity. So you have to do the economics of the first conventional one, buying electricity, generating your steam, or you install a gas turbine and then you generate your own electricity and steam. It depends on the industry. Some industry is a no-brainer. The cogen basically pay by itself. In some industry, there is a challenge, especially when you have excess electricity that you cannot sell to the grid. So you have a gas turbine, let's say a 5 megawatt gas turbine, you only need 2 megawatt, and the 3 megawatt you need to sell to the grid, but you are not able to sell that. So there are a lot of barriers. There are quite a number of barriers that we are still looking at. And that is something that this year we are trying to focus to remove one barrier at a time, and also at the same time increasing awareness, especially when the states, for example, is trying to invest on a new industrial park. So why don't you install centralized utility facilities or CHP in the industrial park? So instead of instead of the traditional way of doing, because in Thailand, a lot of industrial park have this kind of what they call it, the very small power producers, where they generate electricity for the industrial park, and also the cheap water, and also the steam, and also the hot water on the industrial park. So it becomes more efficient.
Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left, and so Renata, I'm just going to summarize as I think the two questions, one coming from Shafirul and one from Nadia, really asking about comparing natural gas to other sources, biomass being one. Maybe they're not as convinced that this, the gas is the best way to go in terms of achieving net zero. What do you say to them about how realistic, again, the timeframes are, the pragmatic considerations, jobs, the economy, the cost of infrastructure? What would you say to those who are still skeptical about gas, natural gas?
I think today gas will likely play a role, but the energy, the fastest growth that we are going to see by 2050 is not going to come from fossil fuels, and gas is one fossil fuel. So it plays an important role of helping to decarbonize and definitely replace coal from the world. We still have a lot of countries that rely on coal for electricity generation, and until we develop large-scale energy storage, we will need dispatchable source of energy, and gas is, as Rosamund mentioned, the benefits of it is a great source to complement the intermittency of today's renewable energy sources. So because we only generate solar energy when the sun's shining, and we only generate wind energy when you have a good amount of wind, you need something to make sure that the economy runs, that you have power when these sources, they fluctuate, they are intermittent. So you can add, gas is critical for that. So it plays an important role. However, there is a game changer in the energy equation, which is energy storage. If you are able to, at a cost-effective way, at utility scale, either convert the energy generated through renewable energy into different energy carriers, and one is hydrogen, for example, or make sure that you have batteries that are cost-effective and can be deployed also at a global scale, that changes the dynamic. So in terms of, you said, who are the skeptics? I think it depends on the audience. Some different audience will risk the natural gas industry out of the map, saying that we cannot get any of this by 2050, then those would be the completely skepticals. Rosman is speaking from the position of the industry, so of course is going to highlight all the positive aspects of that. My own position is that it plays a role. It's important, particularly in a country like Malaysia, but it's going to serve as a supporter of renewable energy. And we don't know, but there are a lot of studies and a lot of research being done in terms of energy storage. And one professor at MIT tends to say that energy storage will do to energy what refrigeration did to agriculture, did to the food system. So imagine that if you did not have a fridge at home, you would have to prepare everything that you need at the day, and you would have to spoil a lot of things. That's the reality today. Sometimes in some countries you have excess renewable energy being generated, and you don't have ability to use all of that. So that is one of the unknowns from 2050. The today thing that we know is that gas can play a role supporting the growth of renewables while we still have this intermittency issue.
All right, thank you very much for summing that up. Rosman, we have about 4 minutes. I'd love to hear your closing remarks. What would you like the audience to take away from this discussion about natural gas?
So I don't inform because I've been talking in the opening statement for 15 minutes, and that was my my case. Essentially, again, the transition cannot happen overnight. This is not my own words. This is actually a statement from Larry Finch, the CEO of BlackRock. So recently, he sent a letter to the CEOs. Every year, he sent a letter to CEOs, and one of his statements was, energy transition cannot happen overnight. So another thing is, you cannot withdraw all your investment in hydrocarbons, because you still need hydrocarbons to go into your energy transition. The other statement that he made was during his interview with, I think, CNBC during that time. He says that we should not stop working with hydrocarbon. In fact, we should work together with the hydrocarbon companies, because it is still required. A lot of the hydrocarbon companies have made a commitment to go net zero. Example, Petronas. And you also have MDA members who are going to net zero, like Shell, ExxonMobil, for example. You also have a utility in Malaysia, TNB, Tenaga Nasional Berhad, who has also made a commitment for net zero, where they say that by 2050, there will no longer be any coal-fired power plant in their portfolio. So when you are, like what Ranto mentioned, as long as there is no stability in terms of providing renewable energy at base load and can be switched on anytime that you want, you will have to rely on another fuel such as natural gas. In fact, yesterday we had an email conversation with our group. Somebody who was living in Canada, for example, he says that I'm so glad that I have natural gas, because first of all, he can use it for heating, because in Canada, -9 is considered as very hot. and then you can also, the thing is, the other thing that he has is, during the cold winters, the wind is not blowing. So that means you rely on natural gas. The other issue that you have with transmitting electricity during the winter time is that your transmission line is above ground, and normally the ice will have lies on the on the transmission line. Then it affects basically your transmission line. But if you have a natural gas, you will always be able to switch on your heating at any time. So my closing remark is, we have to be pragmatic in terms of going to the energy transition. We have to ensure energy security. You have to ensure energy energy security and environment sensibility. And we really believe that natural gas is the fuel to get you there and to help renewable energy grow.
Thank you so much, Rosman. Okay, we've come to 4 o'clock now, so we've come to the end of the discussion. I hope all of you have enjoyed it, and thank you so much for all your questions. I hope We got to answer some of them at least, or to give you a reason to pick up the writing that come out that maybe Renato is producing, and sort of take this conversation further. So I like with that to thank Rosman Hamza. He is Secretary General of the Malaysia Gas Association, and also Professor Renato Lima de Oliveira, who is Assistant Professor of Business and Society at the Asia School of Business. This has been a webinar on Energizing Malaysia's Future with Gas. Thank you so much and have a great day.